Hello and welcome everybody to Biology of Cells and Tissues. Today we're going to be getting into a little bit more of the tissues component of cells and tissues. We're going to talk about epithelial tissue. We're going to do a little bit of just kind of overview, big picture type stuff, and then we'll get into this specific tissue. Of course, here are our objectives. Really good idea for studying this course material. Go ahead and take the objectives, put them onto another sheet of paper or into another like a little Word document or into your good notes or whatever, and begin grouping all the stuff that we learn under these learning objectives, because these learning objectives, these are the things that we really, really need to know. So these are going to be what is tested on. Okay, so levels of physiology. So the levels of the physiology, this is what we're learning about right now. Biochemistry is this chemical level. The cellular level, this is our biology of cells and tissues right now. Tissue level, we get into more and more with physiology. The organ level, we talk a lot about kind of in our anatomy courses. The overall organ systems and the organism as a whole, that we get into all of our pathology courses. So we need to know kind of from the base how things operate in order to understand how things are supposed to be. So that way we understand what is quote unquote normal with the way that tissues and everything are supposed to function. And if we know how they're supposed to function, when we talk about pathology and what is going wrong, it's much easier to understand the things that can go wrong and why those things do go wrong. Okay? So we have histology, a couple vocab words, histology and tissue. So histology is the study of the microscopic structure of tissues. And then, of course, we have the tissues. Tissues themselves are a group of structurally and functionally similar cells, as well as their intercellular material. We'll talk about intercellular material in future courses, other parts. We will talk about, again, specific tissues as well. One of those tissues being the more general, being epithelial tissue, which is what we're talking about today. Again, we're looking at big picture stuff, so we're actually going to look at tissue processing, so how we actually get to see these tissues through our microscope. So we start off with our fresh tissue. Don't think that this isn't important. We want to be able to understand this general process, because this is the process. They do stuff like biopsy, when they take skin cells from a potential cancerous source, or when they cut off a mass or anything like that, and they're checking it. This is part of the process of what they're doing in order to determine, what that is all made up of. We take the fresh tissue, we apply a chemical that fixes or fixates the cells, so it stops them all from moving. It pauses them right there and prevents it from decaying. Then we embed the tissue. So we put it into a solid medium. It's like paraffin wax or a plastic resin, in order to keep it in its exact spot, so that way we can cut it. Then we cut it. We have a super, super thin meat slicer. It takes a super paper thin slice, thinner than paper. It takes like a single cellular level thick, slices it so that we can take a look at it. Then we stain it. Staining, I want to talk about staining a little bit. This is going to be tested on staining, especially like the specific types of stain is going to be tested in this course, as well as you'll want to know some of this for the future, for when you get into microbiology course. You start actually doing some of this in lab. So just go ahead and make a little table, was what I'd recommend, and start writing down the different types of stains. In this course, we'll see like H&E staining, right staining, silver staining. There's another sulfate stain. It's like Oz. Something is for staining for fat cells. There's a handful of them. You should start a table now that goes over and shows, this specific tissue is visible through this specific type of stain. Because if you start that now, as you go through and you learn the material, you'll be able to pull them all out. Much, much easier to review in a simplified table. And finally, we are able to view, after we've cut them and we've stained them, and we're able to view the cells themselves right there. Okay, so again, this is just a little bit of review, a couple more of the same terminology, tissues, histology. Make sure you know those definitions. Those definitions are really, really important and will probably be put on a test somewhere, just the straight definition. We're going to cover 4 kind of general tissue types: epithelial, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and then nervous tissue. This PowerPoint is going to be epithelial. Next, we'll cover connective. Then we cover nervous, and finally muscle. As musculoskeletal doctors, technically, we deal a lot with the connective tissue, a lot with the muscle tissue, and also a lot with the nervous tissue. Those are kind of our 3 specialties. We don't do a lot with the epithelial tissue as chiropractic doctors, medicine goes, but we're really going to want to make sure that we know about it because there are lots and lots and lots of conditions involved with the epithelial tissue. Okay, and like I said, we'll look at each of these tissues in turn. Okay, so epithelial tissue, kind of what is it? It is a sheet of cells that covers the body surfaces or cavities. Okay, so a sheet of cells. There's 2 main forms that it comes in. We have this, what's called the surface epithelium. That's the kind of the covering or the lining epithelium. This is the kind of epithelial, this is the kind of tissue that coats or is on the surface of tissues. So think like this skin, think like the covering of a lot of our hollow abdominal organs, like the intestines, like the stomach, like the esophagus, the trachea, parts of the lung, anywhere where there's a hollow circular-ish type organ, it's going to be lined with epithelial tissue. The bladder is another big one as well. We'll look at that one specifically. Other than surface epithelium, we also have glandular epithelia. These are epithelial cells that secrete stuff in the glands. So we'll look at like salivary glands. There are also specific cells within epithelium that like to secrete these kind of things. Like when we talk about the intestines and stuff, we'll talk about these cells called goblet cells. Goblet cells secrete mucus, so we'll get into all of that. Here's those main functions of epithelial cells. They deal with protection, absorption like in the intestines, filtration, think about like in the kidneys, excretion, secretion, like for hormones, salivary glands, that kind of stuff. And then there's also sensory reception. So they do a lot of stuff. Just like an introductory little picture, surface versus glandular. Now, so the embryological origin of epithelial tissue, it's kind of unique in that it comes from all 3 layers. In general, I'm going to speak in general. This is kind of the best way to remember this. In general, the ectoderm layer deals with nervous system related stuff. Most of our nervous system stuff comes from the ectoderm. The mesoderm layer deals a lot with musculoskeletal tissue, our connective tissues. So the muscles, the bones, the blood. Blood is a connective tissue. We'll talk about blood in the future. Endoderm, we most directly link to epithelial tissue. However, all 3 of them, ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, all of them do contribute to different types of epithelial being produced. So these right here in the next couple slides, this breaks it down a little bit. The epidermis of the skin, the lining of the mouth, nose, and the anus. This is really easy, testable type material that we want to make sure we take a look at. You will get questions such as which of the following dermal layers or embryological layers is responsible for producing the epidermis of the skin, or something along those lines. That's what you're going to hear. And so you want to make sure you remember these. So ectoderm is part of the skin, lining the mouth, nose, and the anus. Mesoderm is endothelium. That is the lining of the blood vessels. You have mesothelium, kidney tubules, and then the reproductive tract. Perfect. Plug these into Quizlet. And then the endoderm, we have the lining of the respiratory and digestive tracts and glands of the digestive tract as well. Here I put them all. These are all of the different structures. This is a little bit above and beyond what you need to know for this course. Stick to the ones that are in each of these slides. But here's a bunch of them all here together in case you need that for another at another time. So, in general, epithelial tissues, there are 5 specific characteristics that we talk about in order to recognize epithelial tissue. First of all, they are avascular. Avascular, meaning A is without vascular vessels, so they do not have necessarily like the vascular tissue, specifically blood running directly to them or through them. In a lot of cases, they may or may not be innervated. That's fine. They are contiguous, which we'll look at what that means in a minute. They are polarized. They are regenerative, and they have basement membrane, which we will get into basal lamina and reticular lamina, kind of what those are. So, avascular. What this means is that the vessels themselves do not actually go directly to the epithelial tissue. They go close to it, next to it, outside of it, and the nutrients pass through the vessel and into the tissue surrounding the epithelium, and then it's passed on to the epithelium. Okay? But there are no vessels directly to the epithelial tissue. Next is contiguous. Contiguous means that the cells are all touching or they share a common border. So they link together. Back when we had the junctions lecture and how everything was connected with all of those different, like as we see here, the zonula occludens, the zonula adherens, the desmosomes, the gap junctions, all of those guys are very, very heavily found within our epithelial tissues because they're all joined together. This is super, super important as well because, we don't want stuff leaking out of where the epithelial is. Think about the skin. Think if things constantly leaked out or in through our skin in large amounts. Very, very bad. Or like our intestines. When you have issues with these junctions and with everything combined together within the intestines, within the gut, that's called leaky gut. And that's a very dangerous and a very unfortunate medical condition to have. So contiguous. Next is polarized. So polarized meaning that it has different surfaces and the surfaces have different components. So there's an apical surface, apical being the top, and you have a basal surface, which is the base or the bottom, the deeper part. Apical is the more superficial, basal is the deeper part, comparing it tissue-wise. So the different molecules or parts of the cell are going to go to different parts of the cell based on polarity, so that changes the function of the different sections of the cells. So it's polarized, it has different charges, different chemical interactions above and below. So we look here as well. This is an example of one of our cells where things are going to naturally migrate, move, change either towards the apical surface or to the basal surface. Next, epithelium are regenerative. So they're really, really, really good at multiplying and regenerating. So the thing about the skin, when we get a cut, it usually just takes a couple of days for it to completely heal. That's because that's some of our epithelial tissue, and it's really, really good at healing and laying down a bunch more tissue. Next, we have another general characteristic is that it has something that's called a basement membrane. Basement membrane, you can kind of think of it like the anchoring membrane. Its job is to attach to the base epithelial layer, keep it there, and make sure that it's staying and it's always in contact so it doesn't come up off of it, so that we can maintain that seal and that protection. We have two different components of the basement membrane. So here's our epithelial cells, and then we have our basement membrane. It's made up of two parts. We have the basal lamina and then the reticular lamina that's even a little bit deeper. So basal lamina is in contact with the epithelial cells. Reticular lamina is a little bit deeper. Here's just another picture kind of going over that. The apical surface is the top. Basal surface is the base or the bottom. You have the epithelial cells, the basement membrane made up of the basal lamina, and then the reticular lamina, and then we get even deeper than that. We see our connective tissue. So talking about this basement membrane a little bit more, just a couple more details. The basal lamina is made up of type 4 collagen fibers, as well as a protein called laminin that is produced by the epithelial cells. The reticular lamina is made up of type 3 collagen and fibrils of type 7 collagen, all secreted by cells of all secreted by cells that are immediately adjacent to the connective tissue. So basement membrane, basal lamina, this terminology oftentimes can be used interchangeably, but when we talk about basement membrane, we want to remember that includes both the basal lamina and the reticular lamina. And again, another picture, there's the epithelial cells. These little strings, wispies coming off, those are some of our cilia. This is the apical surface. Basal surface, we have basement membrane, and then lamina. We'll get into all this more terminology and stuff of that. Now, the big function of our basement membrane is that it provides the structural support for our epithelial cells. It's the guide, the scaffold during tissue injury, during tissue regeneration after injury. It's what really is meant to hold all of the epithelium in place, keep it there, keep it anchored, keeping it where it's supposed to be so that everything else can do its job and that it can be a proper structure and do what it needs to do. Okay, I'm actually going to end this video just a little bit early. My son just woke up from his nap. So this is going to be part 1. I believe this one's probably going to be 3 shorter parts, and we'll get through all of these one at a time. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day and good luck studying.